In all of my research, I have found that the Scandinavian countries are the ones where the PhD students are treated the best, not only in terms of money, but also the way that PhDs are viewed by the general society. They're not slave labor for universities. They're not continuation necessary of, undergraduate study. They are considered much more like a job. In fact, the stipends, the amount of money you get for doing a PhD actually makes you, it's like you're a normal person with a real job and you can contribute to your life and society in any normal way. It's not like slave labor like many other institutions around the world. So in this video, what I want to do is talk about what really determines whether a PhD is valued in a certain country and how you can find out that information, but also stay to the end because I'll go deep on what really makes a PhD student happy and where you can find it. This video is brought to you by my newsletter. Go check it out at andrewstapleton.com.au/newsletter. The link is in the description. When you sign up, you'll get 5 emails over about 2 weeks. Everything from the perfect daily schedule, how to write the perfect abstract, the tools I use, my TEDx talk and podcast, and more. It's exclusive content only available for free, so go check it out now. I think that the number one way you can see how a country values or considers a PhD student is literally by the amount of money they give them. Now, there's 2 things in this equation. First of all, there's the stipend, the amount of money you actually get, but then there is also the living cost. How much does it actually cost to live in that country? And by taking a ratio of those, you can actually work out whether or not a PhD stipend is actual value for money and it's a genuine increase based on the living costs. So, I've talked about it. Scandinavian countries, the reason they're on the top of my list is because they seem to value PhD students' time, effort, and expertise properly. You can look at anywhere between $55,000 to $60,000 per year for your stipend, which is just insane. When I did my PhD in Australia, I got about 20,000 Australian dollars, which is about $5. The problem is that obviously we need to sort of rank this against the living costs. Now, if you go to Numio, you can actually find out the living costs in different countries. And there's a living wage ratio that I think is really important. And if you're considering doing a PhD in different countries, you should look at it. A living wage ratio is the stipend divided by what is actually considered a living wage in that country. Any number greater than 1, fantastic. You're actually going to be earning money. You can save, you can go on holiday, you can buy a nicer car. All of these things actual contribute to life. You can live much closer to kind of a middle class existence. Whereas if you are under that, if your stipend is under the living wage and that number, the living wage ratio is less than 1, that is when you're going to sort of struggle. That's when you're not going to have enough money to really make ends meet. So that is a very important part, and looking for a country where that ratio is in your favor, I think, is very important. Another thing that's really important is workers' rights. Understanding what the general work environment is in any given country. Now I'm going to start on the bad side. I feel like any PhD done in the US is sort of on the lower end of workers' rights. Now, I have been to the US a number of times and I've spoken to a number of business owners in the US. And they can get rid of people much easier than in Europe, than in Australia or other places around the world. Essentially, you can turn up one day and be told you're fired in some places. I know it varies from state to state, but that is terrifying. In other countries, if there is protection for workers, that is a plus in my book. That tells you that that country will be much nicer to work in. Now, when I was doing my postdoc, there was someone on my team who wasn't performing, and my supervisor said it's better to wait out their contract than to fire them, i.e. it's easier just to let them get away with doing nothing and then we won't renew their contract at the end. And to be honest with you, that is the perfect sort of situation to be doing your PhD under, because there's going to be times where you're going to struggle and you don't want that kind of panic and fear hanging over your head, like, will I be fired for not doing my job? Because sometimes in a PhD, things go wrong, and that's the last thing you need. It will really sort of compound the feelings of negativity, imposter, all of that sort of stuff. So have a look at the country's work rights and the workers' rights, and I think choose one that really sort of protects the workers, and I think you'll be in a much better situation during your PhD. To determine which country treats PhD students the best, you've really also got to look at what is actually involved during the PhD. Now, one thing that's always confused me about US PhDs, United States of America PhDs, are their length. And that's because there's a huge amount of coursework to do before you even get into research. Now, some commenters on this channel have said that they have had Europe-based and UK-based kind of like research projects in the States, i.e. they only do the research. Now, for me, if I was doing a PhD, if I had to do it all over again, there's no way I would consider US at all because of the coursework component. I want to get a PhD done as efficiently as possible because at the end of the day, it is a qualification. It needs to be done and it needs to be done as quick as possible so you can get on with your life and move out the other side. So I feel like the Scandinavian countries, Europe, Australia, the UK, anywhere that has a kind of research focus and you don't have to do any coursework or very minimal coursework is better. And it also just shows that a PhD student is valued more. It's not a continuation of study. It's a sort of new phase where you're researching, you're contributing, and you should not only be rewarded for that in terms of money, but also get rid of the coursework components. A PhD, you learn what you need to learn on the job. And I feel like, in the States, they're just blowing it out far too much. You have to remember that a PhD student sits in a system, a little academia, ecological system where you've got the university, supervisors, postdocs, PhD students, research assistants, all of those kind of in an ecosystem. Now, at the top of that ecosystem, the way it gets fed is with grant money, is with state funding, is with just like free money that's floating around and you got to go around and gobble it up with grants. Now, the thing is that if a country does not value research, there is going to be sort of a scarcity mindset. There's going to be competition. There's going to be a fear that your lab will be shut down. And that kind of environment makes the academia environment even more toxic. I've seen it in Australia because as the amount of funding available goes down and the competition increases, people get mad. They get competitive. They get so sort of sinister and they get really horrible. And that is not a good place to be doing research in any country. So I'd be also looking at the amount of funds and importantly government and state funds that are given to universities and what the trajectory of that is like, because throughout the course of your PhD it could go up, it could go down, and it's really important at least that it's stable throughout your PhD, because the last thing you want is a supervisor who's freaking out. Now that brings me on to the last point, which is, all of this is good. Talking about the country in which you are going to do your PhD is important, but what really determines happiness in a PhD? Now, I really believe that the country in which you are doing your PhD really determines the academic culture. But underneath that, there is your supervisor. Your supervisor is the person who's going to be ultimately determining how valued you are as a PhD student and whether or not you have a good or bad time. Now, that sort of like supervisor's attitude is influenced by the university, the amount of money, and obviously the country that they are performing their research under. So the Scandinavian countries, once again, just look like they provide a nice environment for academics. I've heard some really great stuff about Europe as well, Germany in particular, and I think, looking at a supervisor that actually gets on well in the academic system they are working in and they aren't too competitive, they sort of like are the ones that really value their PhD students because, you know, they're not fighting the system, they're working with it. And yeah, that's how I think you get treated really well as a PhD student, is you find a supervisor that's well matched with you, that you like, that is polite, that does everything you need. You know, they're all going to have their little quirks, but ultimately the thing that determines whether or not you're valued as a PhD student is your supervisor. So go check out my other videos where I talk about choosing a PhD supervisor and all that sort of stuff. I'll put the links here or here, wherever they go. And yeah, that is really what determines your value during your PhD. So there we have it. There's everything you need to know about which country treats PhD students the best. Now, I have done my PhD in Australia. I did my undergraduate in the UK where I had some exposure to the PhD system, but you guys are the experts. Let me know in the comments what your country does to help support you as a PhD student. Is it bad? Do they value? Do you feel valued? All of that I want to know in the comments below. Let's help anyone that watches this video, even in a few years' time, that is deciding on where to do a PhD. Mwah! All right then. Also, go check out academiainsider.com. That's my project where I've got my ebooks, the Ultimate Academic Writing Toolkit, and the PhD Survival Guide. And I'll see you in the next video.